So I'm actually going to post a question in the chat first, and please react with an emoji, because this will give me a rule of thumb of who I'm talking with here and your folks' experience with Airflow so far. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll go from here. Nice, nice. Okay. We got some lightning bolts coming through. All right. Okay, yeah, it looks like a good portion of you folks have heard of it but don't use it today, and it looks like no one's really not heard of it, so that's good news. And so I'll keep my definition of Airflow light for the purpose of this conversation. But just to set some context here, for the purposes of my conversation, it's really just around, this is designed for people that are deciding and thinking about, hey, how do I best want to orchestrate my DBT jobs? Does that look like with using DBT Core and Airflow, or DBT Cloud and Airflow? What's the best mix or match, and what kind of questions should I be thinking through, and trade-off criteria that I should be thinking through as I'm going along through these decisions? And so feel free to post the questions. I may take a cursory glance at them throughout and then weave them into kind of the natural kind of flow of my conversation here. But I'm going to show some slides. I'm going to show some live working code here, which is always the best and juiciest part, and then we'll go from there. All right. So for the purposes of this, as you're thinking about orchestrating your DBT jobs, it's really around, hey, how do I schedule these 100 pipelines in my flow today? And as you're thinking about that end output, the question you really should be thinking about behind the scenes at a meta level is, what kind of team are you building? Who are you hiring for? And thinking through the mechanics of that job, it's someone that's going to create like DBT data models. They're going to be deploying this production, like when things go wrong, what's the workflow that you want to be designed in order to make that detective work easier at scale? And just what does it look like to build trusted data to your teams? And so that could look like anywhere on the spectrum of like data engineer, analytics engineers, and analysts. And you'll always have a mix of those three roles. It just depends on where you want to buy it, where you want to make more of your investment in terms of what workflow you're designing and who is that workflow for. And especially for those that may not be as familiar with DBT, I think it helps to just align on some basic tenets of what the modern data stack has done for our industry overall, is that DBT has allowed us to really practically rely on ELT versus ETL formats. And back in the day, I'll just say back in my consulting days, ETL was just the norm, just because you had to. People didn't really rely on data warehouses like they do today, but thankfully they do. And with DBT and in tandem with other tools like Stitch and Fivetran, people typically don't need to have expressive kind of Python transformations, or typically what I've seen normally more often than not is having these over-engineered Python templates to wrap around SQL to then send to Snowflake or BigQuery or what have you in order to run those jobs. And now you get to use the DBT we all know and love. So with that in mind, questions your team is probably thinking through when you're thinking like, hey, do we do Airflow or not, or a combination, is, what people need to be involved for success? Do we have the kind of budget, or do we want the kind of budget to hire advanced data engineers that are handling the whole ELT pipeline end to end? How long will it take to train my existing team, especially for those that have never used Airflow? Are we willing to take on that upfront cost to train them? When it comes to process and technology, ultimately it's around, hey, what skills need to be involved for success? Do I want to go through the training for Terraform, for Kubernetes, for Docker, for Python, for dependency management? Do we want to make sure that as we're hiring our team, everyone has to touch Airflow? Or are we going to design a team where data analysts or analytics engineers always have this handoff system to our Python data engineers? Okay. Other questions you should be thinking through too is, what best fits my team's needs? Typically for the customers I've been working with so far when it comes to DBT Cloud Enterprise versus Airflow, is sometimes you just have a data team of 1 or 2 or 3, and you don't necessarily have the time to build something in Airflow from scratch. And so typically we see people that are like, hey, primarily my team is skilled in SQL, I'm familiar with Git, we just need to get moving fast enough, we've already bought Fivetran or Stitch, let's just move on and get DBT scheduled. Sometimes we just want, we don't want to deal with hosting our DBT docs website in like an S3 bucket or a GCS bucket and working with networking controls from there. We heard something like DBT Cloud, you just get a URL we can share with anyone as long as we have read user seats. So we're good from that perspective. But from an Airflow perspective, there are very legitimate use cases for that, where let's say you have transformation logic that lives outside of SQL, such as SparkML. I've also seen some kind of edge cases. You want to use Airflow as the orchestrator for all your tasks, not just for data pipelines. And so there could be very legitimate use cases where you want to run Golang code and Docker containers within an Airflow pipeline to orchestrate different like back-end system checks, or like spinning up VMs for your data scientists to work from. And so overall, the kind of ethos you should be thinking about with either of these, for dbt Cloud, great for teams that just want to move quickly and don't want to necessarily take a bunch of that infrastructure up front, versus Airflow, it's, hey, we're okay with the trade-off of doing all this customization because we want high flexibility in what we're running within our orchestration pipelines. But either way, both solutions work. They aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. It's just, hey, what best fits your team needs? All right. Overall here, this is more just from an implementation standpoint, is when you're starting from scratch, typically using dbt Cloud will generally be faster than Airflow for a couple of kind of immediate reasons. One, if you are primarily concerned with transformations, and for the most part, you'll 90% of the time, or maybe even 95% of the time, you'll be orchestrating using, dbt jobs. dbt Cloud may be your best bet just to get started up and running and hit the ground running. Versus when it comes to Airflow, you'll inherently need a lot of training and working with DevOps engineers for infrastructure setup, and you'll have to maintain that over time. And the biggest thing is, as I'm sure for those that replied with the juice box emoji, there's a lot of headaches with, hey, this pipeline or DAG worked on my local machine. How come it doesn't work in this Google Cloud Composer environment, or this Kubernetes environment, or this AWS environment? And making sure you have parity across all of that during your workflows. So another component of this is what feeds into that larger timeline is understanding, hey, what skills are needed in order to be successful in the context of using Airflow or dbt Cloud. When it comes to dbt or just dbt Cloud in general, it's, hey, we need to know SQL. 90% of you already have that coming out of the gate, which is great. YAML, you can copy and paste a couple templates and move on with your life. Just the CLI, such as like dbt run and test, and Jinja, which can be like a medium kind of level of difficulty in order to get started with that, but it can be pretty straightforward if you folks use dbt utils, for example, to start off. But what makes Airflow tough, but also just really customizable, is just the fact that you have to learn things like Kubernetes and Terraform and secrets management in order to make sure, hey, whatever I'm running in my local machine can work across the dev, test, and prod cluster. All right. In addition to that, I'm not going to read all of this. This will be your take-home reading if you so desire, and we'll send a PDF of this later. But just, you're probably wondering to yourself, hey, Sung, you showed me a bunch of color blocks here. What's actually building into those things? So it's not just a pretty picture in front of me. So here's the answer to that question you folks are probably asking. And so it's, hey, what actually builds into the training here? You get to leverage your existing skill when you're developing and you're testing and you're merging. When it comes to dbt Cloud, you get a lot of features out of the box where you get to point and click throughout the UI to schedule things. You don't necessarily have to dig deep into setting up a bash script, for example, on your local machine, or using something like Airflow to build that full DAG in order to go through this full kind of software development lifecycle. But when it comes to Airflow timeline components, and a lot of this is built off my personal experience too, so that's just a disclaimer to keep in mind, is it takes a lot of work. And more of the work, more so than not, has to do with the bureaucracy of it. Or it's, hey, security team, is it okay if we just spin up this Terraform kind of Google Cloud Composer cluster to get the Airflow stuff? And then you come up with, hey, okay, we need to lock down the VPCs. Okay, we need to lock down, hey, what IPs do we have to whitelist? Hey, can we actually use, in order to get email notifications, can we use the SendGrid API? And they usually say no 9 times out of 10. And so we can't even get email notifications from our Cloud Composer instance for when Airflow jobs fail. Things along those lines. And part of half the battle of getting Airflow implemented is just making sure you get alignment across different teams before you even can deploy your code across different prod clusters. All right. So I'm going to pause there, and then I'm going to switch over to my Airflow instance. So right now I have a local dev cluster running on my machine. And so I'm just going to refresh this just to make sure everything's working. Beautiful. All right, so I know I have a couple DAGs here, but the things I want to focus on particularly are these two examples here, because it's really around, hey, what does it look like to orchestrate dbt Core or Cloud with Airflow, because both have legitimate use cases. Let's start with Core, since I'm going to assume the majority of you folks are using dbt Core today. And so overall, what's nice about Airflow, especially if you haven't used it today or have never heard of it, is you get a really nice UI that comes out of the box. Another thing too is Airflow is free. And so it's really hard to compete with free most of the time. But overall, what's really nice about this is you get a really nice view of, hey, here's all the code that I'm running in order to make this DAG come to life. And then I've already run this just for the purposes of time, just earlier today, but you get to see some really nice logs. So let's take a look at this. I want to see some logs. This has succeeded at this time, at this particular place. Okay, that's great. Yeah, I get some nice logs along the way. And if I want to simply rerun this, all I have to do is do this, trigger DAG. And then what's nice about Airflow is, especially when it comes to 2.0, you get an auto refreshing DAG. Versus in my past life, I used Airflow 1.0. I literally clicked this 10 times every 10 seconds in order to see what the status was of this. But now you get something that's fresh and coming up live. You can even see logs in real time here. Overall. And the purpose of this is, of why I'm showing you this is, sometimes you want to see dbt jobs run at an atomic level per command. And so for example, if something failed at the dbt run step, instead of having to rerun all the way from the beginning of this pipeline, all I'd have to do is click on this. I just have to clear task, for example. I'd press OK, and then it would clear that and rerun it from that particular place. I won't do that because it's in the middle of a run. Right? While that's running, I'll show you what a dbt cloud example could look like. So I go over here. I'm going to go to the graph view. And here, typically, when it comes to Airflow, the bigger question you want to ask is, I want to orchestrate all my ELT pipelines synchronously. And so that's why you notice here I have a dbt cloud job that is dependent on an extract and load process beforehand. Right now, these are just dummy operator tasks because this is the kind of form of which you probably take when it comes to dbt jobs. But you notice here, when it comes to this dbt cloud job, I don't have it broken down atomically into dbt run and test and so on and so forth, because all of that is configured manually within the UI. So think something that looks like this. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go to settings. And here's where I have all the steps listed out there. And so part of this is because it makes it easier for your analysts or your analytics engineers just to get started with orchestrating their dbt jobs. So I'm going to go back over here. What you probably really care about is when I kick off this step, which is really the meat and potatoes of what we care about, you get some really nice logs coming out of the gate. And so you get this nice job run ID, you get a URL which you can click instantly over here. And then when this is running, the psychology of whether it be an analyst or a data engineer is thinking, okay, so who exactly kicked this off? Oh, it looks like this specific file kicked this off. Okay, so now I know where my starting point is. Another thing too is, hey, if something like failed or ran here, instead of having to dig into Airflow logs, which aren't necessarily the best formatted, I get something nice and color-coded over here. In addition to that, if I want to see more artifacts related to this, instead of coding some over-engineered thing to export those kind of compiled SQL files within dbt Cloud, I get to look at the artifacts. I get to go, hey, I want to take a look at this for whatever reason. I get to click on that. I get to download that to my desktop, copy and paste that in Snowflake, for example, and then move on with my life. So I'm going to go back here, and then this will just give some job status runs based off the JSON payload from the API until it succeeds down here, and then we can go from there. But I'm actually going to go back over here into the dbt example, and actually want to show you what's cool about even dbt core in the context of Airflow is what I was illustrating earlier, where I just want to clear this task. I want to press OK. And then you notice over here, it cleared these two, and it's re-kicking those off if I want to do a manual retry from that point. And then when it comes to dbt Cloud in the context of Airflow, you can do the same thing. I just left click, I go to clear, I press OK, and I move on with my life. Now you're also probably wondering, Sung, hey Sung, like what is the actual code behind the scenes? Because I don't just want to look at a bunch of boxes that are turning green. That's a great question. So over here, I have it side by side. On the left-hand side is the dbt core example. On the right-hand side is the dbt Cloud example. And so I'm going to go dbt core first. These are just some general imports from some utilities and Kubernetes secrets I've built into this cluster. But overall, when it comes to a data engineer, your life gets to be pretty easy because all you have to do is really work with bash commands, get familiar with the Kubernetes pod operator, which essentially spins up a Docker container within your Airflow cluster to make sure that your code is isolated, so you don't have the issue of, hey, I need this exact version of Python, or I need this very exact version of dbt. You get to contain all of that within a specific Docker image. And then all you have to do is pass in your specific arguments or your bash commands here, and you get to move on with your life. But the tough thing is you have to work with your DevOps team and your security team to see, hey, are we allowed to put the secrets within these Kubernetes secrets environment variables? Are we allowed to pull this image from a public internet, or do we have to make a private container in order to get this? Right? And part of this is wondering, Sung, how come you're using the Kubernetes pod operator? Again, it's based off the Python dependencies and just making sure that your code dependencies are isolated. But two, I copied based off GitLab as my role model, since they provide all their data pipelines publicly and make it available to everyone. All right. On the right-hand side is dbt Cloud, and this is based off a utility I built behind the scenes. And I'll share the GitHub link because all of this is open source and free for you folks to use after this conversation. But what's nice about this is I intentionally designed it where you could use the Python operator, and it primarily only relies on Python built-ins. And so if you don't want to work with different Python installations and things like that, you just get to work with the vanilla Python you love. And so you just call upon the Python operator, you make a manual job within dbt Cloud, but you just pass in, hey, here's my account ID, my project ID, and my job ID. I have a built-in method here that calls upon the file name, and then I just get to move on with my life because I already manually configured everything within my dbt Cloud job. Was it here? Okay. So I'm going to pause there. That's pretty much my whole presentation. I know that was a lot of information, so very much looking forward to the Q&A. And let's get rocking and rolling, baby.
Thanks for the energy, Sung.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks for the great presentation. I learned a lot about Airflow just now. Okay, my first question for you, Sung, is what is the coolest Airflow project you worked on and why?
Yeah, I think the coolest one was also the same one where I had my own serendipitous dbt discovery story. So for example, it was a global alcohol beverage retailer. And so I'll say that. And they had a very kind of fragmented kind of approach where it was like analysts had some SQL files that they would cobble up, and then they would pass to a data engineering team who would essentially run cron jobs with some Python spaghetti code on a VM. And it was a very steroidal VM. They had 2 terabytes of RAM. I don't know why they went that approach, but it was a very expensive approach. And I was like, okay, there has to be a much more elegant solution in order to solve this. And it was just like me Google searching and going, oh, it looks like dbt solves my problem. Oh, it looks like Airflow solves my problem at the same time. And so I just married the best of both worlds and implemented it. And it was just a really elegant workflow for them. And it just made so much sense to both parties from an analyst perspective and a data engineering perspective.
Yeah, that story is, I may as well have worked at this global beverage distribution. That was like my story 3 years ago before I started dbt and Airflow too. Okay, George, thanks for the question. Can you come up, introduce yourself, and ask Sung your question, please?
Hey, I'm George, data engineer from Depop. Yeah, I think we're in a bit of a unique position in that we are already like quite advanced Airflow users, but I think we've got certain concerns around, say, analysts almost having to be upskilled in using Airflow with dbt. But I saw at the very end there you said there was like a manual step that you need to create the actual job in the dbt Cloud.
Yes.
Is there a way to do that, like possibly using the API or in like an automated way?
Yeah. So actually, while you're doing that, let me pull up the docs for the API just so you have that handy. And the short answer is yes, you can do that through the API. And you just have to use the Python request library, for example, and just send a body and it'll get a nice JSON payload. Hey, you created this job, ID 12345. And so, yeah, here, I'll even hyperlink to the specific point. I'm going to put it in and reply in thread. Shazam, now you can move on with your life.
Nice one, thank you.
Okay, I have one more question for you, and it's the leading question. Okay, I put it in the chat too. How excited are you for the new DBT build command coming in 0.21?
Ooh, that is a juicy question. Putting me on the spot, Sean. All right.
Because I saw your Airflow DAG, I see your run, I see your test, I see these as little things, but then that just get. How excited are you? Because I'm excited.
Yeah. I think if I'm wearing my analyst and analytics engineer hat, I'm super excited because one, I get to version control my steps. For example, I get to put in a YAML file, dpt run, test, so on and so forth. And I probably get to add some nice little conditions of, hey, if this fails, do this instead, so on and so forth, versus having to add some extra Python overhead code in order to build that workflow myself. And yeah, I'm also imagining that it's going to have one-to-one functionality within dbt Cloud where you build, if it detects a dbt build YAML file, it will render that within the dbt Cloud UI as well. And so that'll be really nice. But from an Airflow kind of dbt core perspective, I'll probably have to make some hard, like, philosophical design choices of, hey, do I want to rely on a native featuring within, what's it called, dbt to orchestrate all my dbt jobs? Or do I want to keep it super atomic and say, hey, I want a very dedicated task for dbt run, dedicated task for dbt test, so on and so forth? Or even have I have dbt run. Next step is Golang, like system, like backend system code utility for whatever reason, and then go back to dbt test. There may be very legitimate use cases for that. Or actually, maybe a more practical one is dbt run Spark ML job, dbt test, which I could imagine be a very realistic one for a lot of you folks here. And yeah, it just depends on what I want. It's not necessarily a right or wrong. It's just like, hey, what makes my life easier? And when things go wrong, what is the workflow I want in my life?
Awesome, thank you. Liam, you've already introduced yourself. Could you ask a question? It'll be the last one to wrap this up.
Yeah, so I've been looking into using Airflow, and the question is that dbt Cloud or do we use dbt Core? And one thing that we have currently in our upstream pipelines is we can pass in arguments to, say, import from one source, and that they're again brought in. Is there a way to pass in arguments like you would when you run dbt run on your machine with variables via the dbt Cloud API?
Yes. Short answer is yes. And if you look at that docs link that I sent earlier, you should be able to, navigate through the table of contents and see what you're looking for there. Yeah, but that's part of why, here, let me share my screen again just to verify what I'm saying. You're able to pass arguments, and that's why I was able to render this within the dbt Cloud job of saying, hey, here's what's actually triggering you. And in addition to that, if you want to override these commands, because you may have an ad hoc, hey, these are the default steps, but I want to run dbt run -m example model, you can do that through a JSON HTTP request as well through the API.